Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Taproot Foundation's webinar this morning / this afternoon, depending on where you're located. Fuel your fundraising with Pro Bono. We're so excited to have you with us. And we've got a packed agenda, lots of content and tips and ideas to go through today. So we're going to go ahead and kick things off. If folks are joining late or need to jump in and out for whatever reason, I do want to make the note right off the top that we are recording this event and will make the recording available to everyone who registered and attended. And we'll work to add that recording to our websites as well. So no worries if you end up having to jump in and out. All right, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'm also going to take myself off of video for the time being to preserve bandwidth, but I'll jump back on video during our question and answer section. All right. So to kick things off, a quick introduction. My name is Kimberly Swartz, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at Taproot Foundation. So I have this really great job of introducing nonprofits, social good organizations, and business professionals to Taproot's programs, as well as creating the resources, blogs, or community events like this one to help make great business pro bono possible. Much of my work stems from and is really driven by feedback and requests from nonprofit community members like you all. So if you've ever left feedback after participating in a Taproot program, answered one of our surveys, sent us a question or commented on something on social media, or even dropped a note or a chat in the webinar chat box, you and your feedback really played a role in making this particular webinar come about. So thank you so much. A focus on how pro bono can help fuel fundraising efforts for nonprofits has been one of our very top requested resources over the past month. So thank you so much for sharing that feedback and making this event possible. So a few logistical notes before I get too deep into the content. I do want to point out that I'm joined by some of my Taproot colleagues. So Hannah Vona is our Marketing and Communications Associate. She'll be really managing the chat box during today's presentation. All attendees will be muted throughout today's event, but please ask questions or make comments in the chat box. Hannah, as well as our Special Projects Associate, Adam Bilo, will be handling questions throughout the event or will direct them to me to be answered during Q&A. So Hannah and Adam are going to be our kind of coordinators of the chat throughout the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, as I mentioned, and we will share that with all registrants and attendees as soon as possible. Before I get into the agenda, I want to share a little more information about what we do here at Taproot in case we have some folks on the line who maybe aren't super familiar with our programs. So as I introduce our nonprofit, the Taproot Foundation, we'd love if you could introduce yourself and the organization you work with in the chat. I know many of you were doing that before the event. We so appreciate it. Feel free to add those LinkedIn informations or website links. We love to see some networking happen. I've seen a few people connect already, so let's definitely keep that going. Just because this is a virtual event doesn't mean we can't get some connections made. So back to a little bit more about the Taproot Foundation. So our organization, our nonprofit, our purpose is really to drive social change by leading, mobilizing, and engaging professionals in pro bono service. Since the early 2000s, Taproot has partnered with nearly 9,000 social change organizations and over 24,000 volunteers, totaling $212 million in donated professional services. In addition to Taproot's pro bono programs and our consultancy work with companies and foundations in the realm of corporate social responsibility, we're also leaders of a global pro bono network and are really committed to advancing what's called the pro bono movement through further research, education, and events by leaning on our 20-year experience forging these cross-sector partnerships. So during today's webinar specifically, Fuel Your Fundraising with Pro Bono, I'll be breaking down the jargon of this phrase pro bono. Got to start from square one, right? We're going to be addressing nonprofit fundraising challenges, as well as walking through examples of discrete, really well scoped out projects that you can complete with Taproot volunteers, which can lead to increased fundraising capacity. Along the way, I'll be sharing some pro bono best practices to keep in mind and lean on as you work with Taproot volunteers or skilled volunteers outside of Taproot. And then we'll be talking about how you can actually connect with free support through Taproot's programs. And then, of course, we're going to save some time at the end for some Q&A. With all that in mind, we've got a packed agenda, so we're going to go ahead and dive right in. And I want to start first with this question of the need for fundraising support in this moment. So Taproot was founded as a nonprofit in 2001 with this knowledge that there's a huge resource gap present in the social sector, right? So we have organizations who may very well have the solutions to our world's most pressing social challenges, but they simply don't have the financial means to carry out these missions to their fullest extent. There's a gulf between what for-profit organizations can spend on internal infrastructure, marketing, and staff development versus what nonprofits are able to invest. And this ultimately affects our nonprofits' bottom lines, the mission that we're delivering to community members. This year, nonprofits are having to operate more leanly than ever, with rising community needs that are still being met after a very tumultuous 2020, while dealing with still decreased access to hands-on volunteer support and canceled fundraising events and more. In Taproot's 2020 nonprofit survey that we conducted during the summer of last year, we found that 63% of our nonprofit community member respondents reported a decrease in funding due to COVID-19 specifically, meaning that the organizations who are very much on the front lines of rebuilding our communities are doing so with shrinking budgets. Recent data also adds to this story of why the need for fundraising support is so critical at this moment. Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy releases a survey every other year that's been tracking the giving patterns of more than 9,000 households since 2000. And they just released their findings from 2018. So this predates the pandemic. And they confirm a worrying trend for nonprofits. Donations to charitable causes are reaching record highs, but the giving is being done by a smaller and smaller slice of the population, with only 42% of US households giving to secular charitable causes. This means that the overall pie of individual giving is being more and more taken over by these ultra wealthy donors whose really large gifts are going primarily to their personal interest areas. These findings, while from 2018 and newly released, are interesting when considered with Independent Sector's Nonprofit Health Q1 report from earlier this year, where they reported that in the first 3 months of 2021, giving to nonprofits in human services and environment animals was actually the only sector of giving that increased. Causes in all other mission areas and issue areas actually experienced substantial decreases compared to previous years. And while more people gave in Q1 of 2021 compared with the previous year, it's not the full story because like we saw in Indiana University's study, donations of $500 or less increased, but giving above 500 decreased significantly. So some trends to keep in mind that kind of lead us into this overall arching point of most organizations tackling social problems don't have access to the resources, funding, or staff expertise needed to fully accomplish those vital missions. The lack of ability to invest in ourselves, invest in our infrastructure, in our sustainability as nonprofits, saps our ability to build strong, resilient, and sustainable organizations. And due to global crises and changes in individual giving patterns, charitable organizations and nonprofits are feeling this strain more than ever, while being pushed to get creative with how we bring in financial support for our missions. And that's really where Pro Bono can help. So Taproot Foundation bridges this nonprofit resource gap through connections with skilled volunteers who provide their tech, marketing, HR, strategy, or finance experience on a pro bono basis. So during today's webinar, we'll specifically be addressing how pro bono support from the private sector, so from those areas I just mentioned, tech, marketing, HR, and more, can apply to a very unique and specific nonprofit need, which is fundraising. So before I get too much in the weeds, I do want to pause on that phrase for just a moment, because often when people hear the term pro bono, their minds go right away to legal. And that's totally understandable. Pro bono is very well established in the legal space, but it's really so much more than just that. So pro bono is donated professional services benefiting organizations working to improve society. In the business community, this typically refers to things like marketing, strategic planning, financial management, HR, and IT, but it really could be any professional services ranging from plumbing to architecture. So Taproot Foundation's programs and our expertise really focuses in on business pro bono in the areas of IT, HR, marketing and comms, and business development strategy. Through a study that Taproot completed with Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, CECP, originally in 2015 and then using refreshed data in 2019, Taproot has determined the average value of an hour of business pro bono service to be $195. Taproot's average pro bono project takes around 30 hours of volunteer time to complete, which means that your nonprofit is looking at donated services amounting to just under $6,000 per pro bono project you request and complete with a business volunteer. So through the webinar today, when I say that pro bono is a valuable tool, we really, really, really mean it. By infusing use of pro bono support throughout your departments and throughout your thinking of planning, executing, and evaluating fundraising and development efforts, you can save money on your bottom line while building capacity and longer-term stability. And I want to get into that a little bit more. So this question of why turn to pro bono for building fundraising capacity specifically. And it really falls under these three big categories. The first of which, get the right expertise for the job. I want to be completely transparent with you throughout this webinar. Skilled volunteers from the corporate world will not be able to step in and run a fundraiser for you. That's not where their skill set is, right? That's where nonprofit professionals can be really, really experienced and great. But it's not so much a skill that's been readily developed in the corporate world. Instead, corporate volunteers or folks from the private sector can help build your capacity to do fundraising more successfully by leaning into their own tech, marketing, communications, social media, graphic design skills, and more, freeing up your organizations, your staff, your team space to focus in on your programmatic efforts. So even your amazing team members can't be experts at everything. So getting that seasoned marketing strategist or copywriter could complement skills that exist already on your team, which also serves as a professional development opportunity for your team members or yourself, right? So often nonprofit teams are small, so there isn't always someone more senior than you that knows the subject matter at hand. So instead of wearing 10 different hats, bring in a volunteer who's an expert at one or two of those things to offload them from your plate and bring in the right expertise for that task. The second bucket I want to address is making new friends, making new connections, and really strong and powerful connections at that. So those of you who rely on volunteers know that they're invaluable in the extra hands that they supply. But you also know that some of them might not fully know your mission if they're only coming in for a one-day hands-on volunteer stint. Oftentimes, a pro bono project is going to differ from this completely, right? Because it requires the business professional to really understand your work and your mission at a fairly deep level. And as a result, you can create lasting supporters through a pro bono experience. I can't sit here and promise that all of your pro bono partners are going to stick around for multiple projects or become one of your biggest donors, but they may, right? They formed a deep, lasting connection with you, feel like they have a hand in reaching your goals and reaching your mission. So pro bono can be a really great way to build lasting connections. And even if your pro bono volunteer only begins to follow you on social media, or even just tells their friends about this work that they did for you, they are helping you build your community. So this type of engagement is really strategic, and it allows you to show your supporters how resourceful you are, right? By showing off on social media, we just built out our this new gadget on our website using volunteer support, and we were able to save that budget and put it towards this community program instead. That shows potential donors in the future that you're being really strategic and scrappy with how you're using budget, making sure that it's going towards your mission in the most impactful way as possible. And then this last bucket I want to talk through is kind of the most self-explanatory: doing more with less. Pro bono allows your organization to accomplish more from its fundraising efforts without breaking your budget. Rather than having your executive director who's not experienced with social media try to run a digital crowdfunding campaign for Giving Tuesday, instead, you could work with volunteers who are expertly skilled at each component of creating and pulling off that campaign. So the copywriting, the graphic design, the social media management, and more, freeing up your executive director's time to work on things that they are incredibly skilled at instead. Pro bono is also a great way to engage board members in true resource raising, either by recruiting pro bono consultants from their own networks or managing the pro bono resources themselves. And as we just talked about on our last slide, the actual value of the pro bono services your team or board would be bringing in can really add up project to project. So something to keep in mind as well. Now, I've already seen a few questions come into the chat about some potential projects to work on with volunteers when it comes to this idea of building capacity with nonprofit fundraising. So let's get into it. We're going to go through a lot of examples on this call. So there's so many possibilities for how volunteers can support your fundraising and development efforts. I'm going to run through some examples that kind of fall in the areas of fundraising, campaign planning, creation, and distribution, as well as long-term relationship manage. And all of these projects have really well-defined scopes, meaning that they have a clear goal that can be accomplished within around 2 to 9 weeks of volunteer work. And each of these examples is pro bono that Taproot has seen have real demonstrated impact on the capacity of our social change organization partners. And then another great benefit of these project examples I'm about to run through, each and every one of them can be completed through Taproot's pro bono programs through a connection with one of our amazing volunteer community members. And if there are any of our volunteer community members on the line, please give yourself a shout out in the chat. We want to make sure we can thank you for your incredible volunteerism. So be sure to hang around until the end of the presentation. That's when I'll go through how to actually request pro bono through Taproot's programs and get connected with our volunteers. But first, let's get into some of these project recommendations. I want to start with covering pro bono examples from the really large umbrella bucket of business development strategy. My reason for starting here is that a fundraiser, a specific fundraising campaign or a fundraising event should not set your organization's business development or marketing strategy for the year. Your business development and marketing strategies should instead inform how your organization executes fundraisers. So you kind of need one before doing the other. Put simply, in order to fundraise well, you need a clear vision of how, what, where, when, and to whom you're communicating with. Fundraising campaigns are stronger when they're tied securely into your overall strategies and goals for the year so that no work is redundant or off-brand. And since a volunteer who has worked in the private sector their entire career might not have a clear understanding of nonprofit fundraising best practices, consider using their skills in targeted ways in order to shape your overall fundraising strategy. For instance, a volunteer with a background in finance or investment could step into your nonprofit to evaluate the pricing of your programs, services, sponsorship opportunities, products, or fundraising packages, and make recommendations on potential shifts that would help you increase revenue that you're bringing in. Or another example I'll call out is a volunteer with a background in doing market research or stakeholder research could develop a comprehensive picture of who your organization's ideal donor is, down to where they're hanging out online or offline, what they're reading, who they're influenced by, and more, so that your nonprofit has a crystal clear picture, or otherwise known as a user persona, donor persona, of who your audience is for fundraising and the messaging that needs to be used to drive action, to drive donations from those audience members. A few other pro bono project ideas that are listed on the slide here that I want to touch on quickly would be things like pitch development. So how are you selling your mission to different types of audience members, from corporate partners, family foundations, to individual donors, big and small? Solidify your viewpoint with support from a volunteer who can lend a fresh perspective on what makes your nonprofit so special, what sets you apart. Next project recommendation here would be data assessment and tracking. So how are you determining fundraising success? Is it all about the dollars being brought in, or are you factoring in brand awareness or exposure as well? And then how are you tracking all of these metrics? How will you know when you're successful? A professional with experience in data can help you get really organized here so you can set yourself up for success. And then my last example I want to spend some time on is around business planning. So what's your overall strategy for bringing in the financial support that your nonprofit or organization needs to operate? If you're a startup or in the process of reevaluating how you source funding, working with a strategy professional to create a business plan is an incredibly impactful way to build long-term capacity and stability. And I have already seen a few questions come through around, does Taproot work with startups? I will answer that right now. Yes, we absolutely work with startups. There's no budget or staff size requirement when using Taproot's services. And then the pro bono quick wins section that you see here on the bottom calls out how you could lean on business professionals for quick, specific consultations, and more on that Taproot service offering later. But my recommendation here, if you're looking for support in business development strategy, but you don't necessarily have the time to dig into full-length projects, I would consider holding calls with strategy pros on topics like what could set our fundraising pitch apart? You know, get quick recommendations, get quick brainstorming. Where should we even start when setting up a strategy for our campaign? So maybe work with someone who can just start from square one with you and help you get organized before you kind of dive into longer term planning or strategizing. And then my tip for any business development or strategy pro bono work is begin these projects well in advance of any fundraiser for the most effective results. For instance, you don't want to create a strategy for your virtual 5K race the day before you kick off registrations for it, right? So a strategy, this plan is something you want to have well in advance of kicking off any of the execution of your fundraiser. So moving right along, I want to build on the strategy piece we just walked through on the business development side of things by addressing marketing planning specifically. Because there's really a reason that develop and marketing staff members work so closely together at nonprofits, or may even be the same person. Raise your hand in the chat if that's you, if you're in a dual role. Fundraising, whether it's grant writing, pitch decks for major donors, annual galas, social media crowdfunding, really anything in those buckets and more, it involves a tremendous amount of communications and marketing work. So this overlap, and I see folks chiming in the chat that this describes them, there's a tremendous amount of overlap. And so really wanted to break this out into its own recommendations and have a few thoughts here on how volunteers can help with this marketing strategy and planning piece through discrete pro bono projects. My first thought is before beginning the creation of all of the disparate pieces of your fundraiser, I'd consider creating a fully fleshed out communications plan that describes what you want to accomplish with your fundraiser's communications, ways in which those objectives can be accomplished, whether that's through email campaigns, a social media campaign, videos that you're going to create, a photography series. You want to have that list of channels already thought through, as well as the audience for those communications, the tools and timeline for which you'll use to accomplish those objectives, and then how you're going to evaluate the success of your campaign. So all of those items can be contained within a communications plan, which is I always recommend for folks who are coming to us looking for fundraising assistance. Another strategy piece that's key would be a PR plan. So what's your public relations plan? Get people talking about your organization in the best possible way, right? So a public relations plan identifies an organization's communication goals for target audiences, then develops strategies to achieve those objectives. The plan can include recommendations for a broad number of tactics, right? So it doesn't just have to be for the media. It could include a PR calendar, relevant media lists that the volunteer has researched, coaching on how your staff can manage media relations, templates for news releases, speeches, or even press kits. So this can really span and accomplish a lot of things under the bucket of PR. And then my final marketing planning recommendation would be to work with a social media specialist to create a distinctive social media strategy for your fundraising objectives. These days especially, people are living online. Social media is our opportunity as nonprofits to make one-on-one personal connections with audience members. It's a huge area of opportunity, but the social spaces are crowded. I don't think that statement's going to surprise anyone here on the line. It can be tough to get noticed and to kind of cut through the noise, which means that it's crucial for your organization to have a clear vision of what goals you're using social media to accomplish and how you're going to be executing on those fundraising campaigns in the social space that drive towards those goals. You don't want to spend time investing in work that ends up not driving towards anything, right? So you want to make the most of your limited time and staff capacity to manage pro bono, as well as make the most of your volunteers' time and energy as well. And I've actually volunteered as a social media volunteer a few times through Taproot's programs, and want to reiterate something key here. Volunteers shouldn't be the ones to dictate what your goals for social media or the other elements we talked about here. So the PR plan, your communications plan, volunteers shouldn't be the ones to tell you what your goals should be. Volunteers can help your team figure out which objectives could be the best fit for your organization based on their own experience doing this in their day-to-day. And they can help you set some metrics to put against those goals. But you and your team need to have an idea of why you want to use those marketing channels in the first place, right? So think through, is it to reach more supporters? Is it to get more community members engaged in your program? Is it to activate potential advocates on social media or in the media or press? Your volunteer will want an answer to those questions as they formulate these marketing strategy and planning pieces. And then the last thing I'll cover here is if you don't have the time to manage a full-length pro bono project in these areas, I consider matching up with a marketer for a quick consultation session to cover things such as evaluating what's worked well in the past for some of your fundraising campaigns and what hasn't. So sometimes a neutral third party can be really, really great for that. And then second topic you could address during a quick consultation call would be, where do we even start when it comes to setting up a marketing strategy? You know, if you're not a marketer yourself, sometimes you don't even know what to request from a pro bono project until you talk with a marketing expert to see where you should even begin. So a quick consultation call is a great way to actually plan for larger pro bono projects down the road. Now, moving from broad strategy pieces to a much more specific element of campaign building, being graphic design. Graphic design is always one of Taproot's most requested pro bono items, so wanted to give it its own dedicated breakout slide. Because it's super important for fundraising efforts, right? So we want to capture the attention of potential supporters through marketing materials and website and social media images that highlight your mission and the impact that your programs have on the community. So design projects for fundraising campaigns could include things like packaging social media graphics, updating program logos, producing new brochures, creating eye-catching email templates, even updating one-pagers, or even retooling website graphics to ensure that they're accessible for all site visitors. Design is a great example of a field where a volunteer does not need to have any experience with nonprofit fundraising in order to deliver high-quality outcomes that your nonprofit can use immediately to tell your story and bring in financial support, right? So no nonprofit experience needed. Their skills are right away incredibly impactful on your organization's fundraising goals. A few project ideas to consider here with a graphic design volunteer would be something like a landing page design. So you could consider setting up a distinct landing page for your fundraiser, your gala, your auction, your virtual run, etc., in order to have a super clear call to donate. This landing page could incorporate your organization's branding and any distinct campaign branding as well. And then my second idea here is around swag or merchandise design. So are you giving away merchandise to donors who maybe give at a certain amount? Maybe there's a certain tier where they get a free t-shirt or a free sticker. Everyone always loves free merch. Or maybe does your nonprofit sell branded gear to raise funds for your mission? Either way, graphic design volunteers can help you create fun merchandise fun branded swag to increase donor motivation. So this is definitely a good way to consider using a digital graphic designer. And then in the quick wins section, you could consider working with a graphic design professional for just a quick consultation call. If you don't need them to create any materials for you, but you do have some design questions, you could think about going through topics such as, what would you change about our current imagery? Here's what we used for our last fundraising campaign. Is there anything off about this? Is there any opportunity for us to do this even better in the future? Another topic could be campaign logo brainstorming. Maybe your organization has never done distinct branding for fundraisers. Maybe you've just always stuck to your organization's overall branding. And if you want to change it up at all, having a call with a graphic designer for a brainstorming session could be a great way to use that time. And then a tip here for graphic design pro bono work is to make sure you have style guidelines and like a color palette already set so that your volunteer partner can build imagery from that style guide. And if you don't have a style guide or branding guidelines created, I would recommend starting with that as a pro bono project first, right? So it's kind of, you don't want to start pushing your cart without the horse, right? So start with creating the style guide first before bringing in graphic designers for fundraising specific elements. And then my next bucket of pro bono recommendations as they relate to fundraising falls under this kind of broad category of copywriting. So does your organization need compelling messaging that communicates your work and community impact to potential and existing supporters? Copywriting projects can help you develop messaging and stories that resonate with your target audience through email, social media, your website, and beyond. So even though the volunteer skill set list is a little shorter here on the slide, copywriting can span many different areas of your development, marketing, and communications work. Your organization could work with a volunteer to draft copy for email campaigns, web pages, the landing page we just spoke about, key messages, pitch materials, social media, and more. I've even seen nonprofits use pro bono copywriting to draft chapters of books their organization was working to publish and sell to bring revenue in to support their mission. So you can get really creative with copywriting, but I will advise you to be very specific about the types of copy that the volunteer will be responsible for creating. So someone who is great with quick, engaging one-liners for social media, they may not be the best fit for drafting long-form programmatic or key messages descriptors, right? Or a one-line on social media that's very casual. That person might not be the best at creating materials or pitch script for the materials that you're going through with potential corporate or foundation sponsors. So really key in on the type of copywriting that's needed before you post your pro bono request here. And then I also just want to call out that copywriting and editing is one of the quickest forms of pro bono on average. So even if your deadline, even if your fundraiser is coming up relatively soon, pro bono could still be an option to explore here. So definitely wanted to call that out. And then a consultation call recommendation that would be really fun, I think, to work on a volunteer with would be to brainstorm with a creative professional what a fun campaign tagline could be, or what your campaign hashtags could be if it's going to be primarily social media. You could do a really great ideation session with someone who's really skilled with creative messaging. And then moving along, When I've chatted with nonprofits in the past about how volunteers can help with fundraising, I will occasionally hear a note of surprise when I mention that IT and tech professionals can actually play a big role in expanding a social goods organization's capacity to fundraise well. But this can actually be one of the more cost-saving and impactful forms of fundraising capacity building that we've talked about thus far. So I want to unpack that a little bit. So when you think about a successful fundraising campaign, this is a drive that is going to activate existing supporters and attract new ones to your cause, which means two things. One, your fundraising campaign is going to bring a lot of traffic to your website. And then two, you're activating existing supporters, developing new relationships, and you need an efficient way to track that data. So my thought on the first one, bringing traffic to your website, making sure the quality and impact of your work is well represented on your website is going to be key for converting these visitors into donors. You want to make sure that it is incredibly easy for your community members to figure out how to take action, how to donate to support your fundraiser. By working with a website development or user interface expert, your organization can optimize the layout, appearance, and content on your site to maximize the results of your fundraising efforts. A huge heads up, I do want to note on these types of pro bono projects, please begin them well in advance of any large fundraising push for them to really effectively boost your efforts. These need to be started months in advance of a fundraiser for the volunteer to really have enough time to go through it effectively with you. And then going back to that second point around tracking the data of the new donors that you're bringing into your organization, you need an efficient way to make sure you're tracking that and storing it. So optimizing your customer relationship management database, or CRM, can help improve your nonprofit's ability to efficiently maintain and create relationships with supporters so that you're able to build on the success of one fundraiser, gala, auction, etc., by creating long-term relationships with those donors. A few other IT or tech related pro bono recommendations are listed here, so check them out. Things like optimizing your sales or donation platform or assessing your CRM needs. I also shout out that if your organization is considering continuing to hold virtual fundraisers in addition to in-person fundraisers, you could consider working with a tech professional to actually research online event platform options or train your team on managing those event platforms. And those are things that are absolutely possible through pro bono. So that would be a great, very creative, tactical way to use pro bono support to support fundraisers. And then a few ideas for how to make use of quick consultation sessions from skilled tech professionals would be topics such as getting feedback on your current website donation page from a web developer, designer, or UI expert, or something like working with a CRM professional for quick problem solving on the current customer relationship management database that you're using, such as Salesforce, for instance. I can actually share that, I mentioned Taproot's a nonprofit ourselves. We have used consultation sessions in Salesforce specifically. So that is, I can vouch for a great way to use pro bono. So my last bucket of recommendations here is around digital marketing. And so this is a big one. There's so many possibilities here. So I'm just going to cover some of the most common pro bono projects that I see here at Taproot. The first of which is Google Ads. A Google Ads project will help your nonprofit maximize the benefits of an advertising grant on Google throughout your fundraising campaign. This project will review your nonprofit's targeted audience and marketing tactics to really write copy that has the right keywords that get your website noticed by potential supporters. And that leads me to my next recommendation here, which is website application development. This project can help you build or add a new feature to an existing website, or even troubleshoot functional issues in navigating or managing your site. So work in this area can help ensure that all systems are up and running smoothly and efficiently when your organization experiences heavier website traffic throughout your fundraiser. And then finally, content strategy / recommendations. Your site may have an awesome fundraiser landing page and amazing stories of impact, but if you haven't invested in search engine optimization, you may not be getting noticed by people surfing Google. So work with a volunteer skilled in content management and search engine marketing to assess your current site content, the keywords that you're using, and make recommendations on where to improve so that your website can start creeping up on that Google search results page. And then some quick consultations that you could work with a volunteer to knock out would be things like walking through the basics of how to use tools like Google AdWords or Google Analytics, or asking specific questions on how to implement changes or fixes on website hosting platform that your organization currently uses, such as Wix, Squarespace, WordPress, etc. Oh, and I just saw Susan shouted out that they worked with a WordPress volunteer specifically. So the perfect example of how a volunteer could be really, really helpful in this area specifically. So I'm just keeping an eye on time, and I want to make sure that we get to everything. So I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead to kind of address this question of, you've heard a lot of examples of how professionals from the business world can help build the capacity of your fundraising efforts. You've heard some tips for how to plan for and manage this pro bono successfully. And at this point, you may be wondering, okay, this is all great, but how do I actually find someone with the right skills to get this project done and for free? So that's where Taproot can help. So let's go ahead and get into it. We've made things simple and streamlined through our free online nonprofit and volunteer matching platform, Taproot Plus. So Taproot Plus is designed to be really flexible and nimble so that any nonprofit can get skilled volunteers, no matter how big you are, how long you've been around, and then any business professional can support said nonprofit no matter where they're located. So it's completely free to use. And this is Taproot's way of really scaling up the pro bono movement and making sure that everyone who wants to use pro bono and needs access to these resources has a way to do so. So currently, Taproot Plus is open to registered nonprofits, public schools, and fiscally sponsored social good organizations across the United States, United Kingdom, European Union, and India. And we also opened up select services to small businesses in light of the crises of 2020. So you can drop a note in the chat if you'd like any more information about the small business initiative, since I won't be going into detail on that during this event specifically, but happy to answer questions offline. And to answer a few questions that I have seen come in, there's no limit to the number of staff members at your nonprofit who can have an account on Taproot Plus. So later today, when we send out the recording of this event, please feel free, forward the info to a colleague who could also benefit from virtual volunteer support. So I know we talked a lot about fundraising specific during this call, but if someone from your HR team or finance team could also use support, this is a resource for them. And then just to reiterate, because this is a frequently asked question, there really is no charge for using Taproot Plus to request or manage pro bono. Taproot's mission as a nonprofit is to get resources into the hands of fellow nonprofits. You will never pay us a fee for using Taproot's programs. So to get started, all you need to do is to pull up a browser and head over to www.taprootplus.org. I think Hannah's also going to plug a link, which will appear. Yep, it's a banner at the top of your screen right now. So you can go ahead and hit that to start the request submittal process. And then I do want to save a good amount of the rest of the time for Q&A. So really going to zoom through these. Once you've submitted your account details, have confirmed your email, you've set up your Taproot Plus account, it's really as simple as that. You're ready to request Pro Bono from Taproot. And you have two main options, a project or a consultation session. Most of what we've talked about today has been on projects, but all of those consultation topic ideas that we went through fall under the bucket of sessions. So sessions are 60-minute one-time calls with an expert that are really great for brainstorming or quick answers to specific questions. But I want to get into the project posting form because I have seen some questions come through on that specifically, so we can address those right now. So on the project form, you're going to start by selecting which category your need really falls under. We'll be following up after the event with the recording to this and the catalog of common pro bono projects where you see all of the text on the side of your screen right now. Don't worry about frantically jotting down notes. We're going to share out this common projects catalog as well as a catalog that focuses in on fundraising needs. So be sure to check your inboxes later today. And on your project request form, you really just need to be able to tell us what you want to walk away from a project with, what you've done to prepare for the project, and then what the project will mean for your organization. And that's really to help potential volunteers who are scrolling through these opportunities for seeing what their work, what their volunteerism is really going to mean for your organization. So it's a volunteer recruitment tool. So make sure you have answers to what do you want to walk away from the project with, what have you done to prepare, and what will this project mean for your mission? And then once your project is reviewed, because Taproot staff members review every single request that comes in. So even though this is an online platform, you very much still have a review by real life Taproot staff members. So we'll work with you if we feel like the project request needs any more tweaking. And then after the project has been approved, it gets its own listing page on our website. And we'll share your project with skilled volunteers via email. So folks who have already signed up and are part of our community, we have 80,000 plus volunteers who are already registered. So if their skills match up with your needs, they'll receive an email from us. We also have a partnership with LinkedIn's Volunteer Marketplace, where your pro bono listings will also be boosted out for free via LinkedIn. And then you'll start seeing volunteer applications hopefully start coming in almost immediately, although sometimes it does take a little bit longer. And you're going to get to review their resume, their LinkedIn profile, and a statement of interest, so kind of a quick cover letter. And you'll get to choose who you interview. So who do you think could be the right fit? And we always recommend treat pro bono applications just like you would someone who's applying as a paid staff member for your organization. You want to make sure you're vetting these folks and that they really are the best fit to work with you and your team. So yeah, check out their resume, ask for a portfolio, ask some tough questions in your interview with them. Definitely dig in with them. And there are options to keep projects open to accept more than one volunteer. So I did see a question about that come in earlier. You can work with multiple volunteers on one project. So with that, I know we had a lot of questions come in, so I want to make sure we save time for Q&A. I'll also just add that anything that we did not or end up not being able to address on this webinar, my colleagues and I, we have a copy of the chat. And so we know who you are, we know what your email is, and we will follow up with you personally. So even if you don't hear your question answered now, we will follow up one-on-one and make sure that it gets answered. So I'm going to go ahead and Hey folks, I am so sorry. It looks like I'm experiencing some internet difficulties. Oh, okay, great. It says sound is back. I'm so sorry for the break there. Can I get a few other confirmations? James just said, okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and keep rolling then and go back to the question I was answering before we lost sound. So we had a question about getting tech platforms or website platforms optimized for running some virtual programs. It sounds like you need to have some distinct projects. You need to have one that optimizes the event platform you're using for your fundraising, fashion/hair show. And you also need to have a distinct project around this virtual mentor program that you're starting up. Keep in mind that Taproot volunteers will typically be able to spend around 2 to 5 hours each week with you. And so these are not folks who are stepping in and taking on full-time or even part-time positions at your organization. They have full-time jobs themselves. And so when you're thinking about where they can be most helpful and beneficial to your work, it's with these small, discrete projects. So break them up as much as you can and as much as it makes sense. But just for your question around, is this possible? Yes, absolutely possible to get volunteer support with website updates or finding tech platforms to host virtual volunteers on. How can I submit a project that volunteers are likely to respond to? This is a really great question. So I went through at the end kind of those 3 pieces that you need to have before submitting a project on Taproot Plus. You need to have a clear idea of what you want to walk away from the project with. You want to have a clear checklist of sorts of what have you done to prepare for the project. Even if that preparation is just, we have identified a team member who is going to be your point person. We have pulled together materials from past fundraisers that you can use as reference. We have an example of graphics that we really liked in another organization, and we felt like this could be an inspiration from you. Any materials or any preparation, even if it's just brainstorming that you've done, by putting it in your project request, it shows potential volunteers that you are really dedicated to this project, you've already invested time in it, and you have a plan for implementing it. Really, the worst possible scenario for a volunteer is if they step in, create something wonderful for you, and then it never gets used because you didn't have any idea for implementation. So that piece, even if you just allude to it in your pro bono request on Taproot, can be super helpful in getting matched with a great volunteer because they know you're serious about the project they're completing. So hopefully that helps answer your question. So I see another one about, does Taproot help with ongoing projects? Looks like this organization formerly had an agency who was handling Google AdWords. So Taproot is not a great fit for ongoing needs. It's a better fit for short-term discrete needs. However, you could work with a Taproot volunteer to set up your goals for Google Ads for the year, and then train a staff member on how they can then manage Google Ads going forward using the framework and using the Google Ads strategy that the volunteer expert created for you. So that would be an example of kind of filling an ongoing need with a strategy planning piece plus a training and facilitation piece. And then it looks like, I have another one on, should we book a consultation before requesting a project? So yes and no. I think consultation sessions are a great way to prepare for projects if it's in a subject matter where you don't really feel confident managing said project yet. If you're not a marketing expert, but you want to bring someone in to create a social media plan for your upcoming holiday giving fundraiser, for instance, it may be a good idea to have a consultation call with a social media expert to kind of pick their brain about who should you be looking for in a volunteer candidate, right? Because you don't even know what to interview for or what to include in your social media pro bono project request because you don't have the experience there yet. So a consultation session before in that type of scenario can be really, really helpful in providing that extra context and background information that you need to properly plan for, recruit for, and then manage a longer term pro bono project. But if you feel confident that I need a communications plan for this year's fundraiser, and I know what that looks like. We've done it in the past, but I don't have capacity to do it myself this year. That's an example of, I don't think you need to have a consultation in it first. It sounds like you could just run ahead and request the project right from the get-go. I do know we are 2 minutes over, so I apologize. We're a little over time, so if you have to drop, I totally understand. I'm going to hang around for just a couple more minutes to answer some more of these questions. But if I did not get to your question on this call, we will follow up with you individually after this event. So don't worry, all of your questions will get answered. So I'll hang out for another couple minutes and answer some more of these that came in. So is there a limit on the number of projects or quick consultations you can request or be granted in a year? No. So Taproot does not place any limits on the amount of requests that you or your organization can request. However, I would say that your limit it's kind of a personal decision, right? Because it depends on how much bandwidth do you have to effectively manage these pro bono consultants, right? Because these aren't just hands-on volunteers where you can kind of point somewhere and say, go paint that wall or go set up that playground. These are volunteers. You're going to have to work closely with them, maybe have a check-in with them likely once a week to make sure that they are meeting your project goals and objectives, make sure that they have all of the information and materials from you and your team that they need to complete pro bono well. So think about the time that you have available to manage a volunteer on a project and use that to determine what your own limit of pro bono should be, right? So typically my recommendation for people who are totally new to pro bono, have never used it before, I would say start with one project and kind of gauge, okay, how much of my time each week did it take to manage this project? And then you can kind of use that to, set yourself up for managing more projects down the road. We have some pro bono users on Taproot Plus, some nonprofit community members who are so expert at using pro bono at this point that they have 10 projects going on at a time, and they're able to manage that super effectively. So it depends on your own comfort level. So sorry, not the most specific answer. It truly depends. So I see a few questions about expanding services to specific countries. So want to reiterate, if your social good organization is a registered charitable organization in the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, and India, then you are eligible for Taproot's services. So, even if you're located in rural Kansas, you can still work with a volunteer who may be in New York. We are looking into expanding services outside of those regions, but unfortunately, I do not have a timeline that I can share. I see a few folks ask specifically about Lebanon and Liberia. Unfortunately, I don't have a timeline for when Taproot Plus would be available in those regions, other than if your organization does programmatic work in Liberia, but is registered as a charitable organization in the US or the UK, even though your programmatic work is taking place outside of the country, as long as you're registered in one of the areas that Taproot services is, eligible for, then you're good to go. So US, UK, EU, and India. All right. Looks like how many volunteer hours per week or month would you say qualifies as a small discrete project? I would again go back to this idea that you can expect a volunteer to work around 2 to 5 hours per week on your project. So if you are bringing in a copywriter to create some social media copy for your upcoming fundraising campaign and have plotted out, all right, I need this amount of posts for Twitter, this amount of posts for Facebook, etc., and you kind of mapped it out, this is going to take 15 hours. Then you could theoretically expect that project to take about 4 weeks, because on average, that volunteer would then be spending around 3.5 hours per week working on your copywriting for your social media campaign. So kind of think through it that way. Also, in your interview with your volunteer applicants, they're the experts in these topics. So ask them how long they think that this project may take them to work. That is a totally appropriate question to pose to volunteers. Ask them, with all that you now know about what our nonprofit needs, how long do you think that this project is going to take? And rely on them to give you an honest answer, right? They're the experts in this field. You might not necessarily be. So lean on their expertise to lay that out for you. All right. Unfortunately, I do have to jump off, and I see we still have some unanswered questions. So please know I'm going to dig through the chat, and I will follow up with you personally to answer those questions for you. So I'm so sorry we couldn't get to it live. There were so many great questions. I so appreciate all of the engagement and everyone who introduced themselves and took the time. And I'm looking forward to kind of following up and keeping these conversations going via email. So keep an eye out for your inbox later today. We'll send the follow-up email. I'll also include my personal email in that as well. So even if you didn't answer or ask a question in a chat, if something comes up down the road in the next couple of weeks, as you're thinking back on this webinar and thinking through the ideas that were shared, you can always ask a question then as well. All right. I'm going to go ahead and shut things down, but I so appreciate all of the folks that joined and you taking the time, and we hope to see you on Taproot Plus soon, requesting pro bono. We're looking forward to getting you linked up with some volunteers who can help build that fundraising capacity with you all. All right, everyone. Thanks again. Bye now.